He moved slower than everyone else in line, but when the bank manager saw what was pinned to his shirt pocket, the entire room fell silent. It was another ordinary Tuesday morning at First National Bank in downtown Springfield. The usual crowd had gathered, business people checking their phones, mothers juggling toddlers, college students between classes. The line moved with typical morning efficiency until an elderly man in a wheelchair rolled through the automatic doors. Frank Morrison, 78 years old, wore a simple blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his weathered hands rested calmly on the armrests of his wheelchair. To everyone around him, he looked like any other retiree handling his monthly banking. Frank positioned himself at the end of the line, patient and quiet. He'd been coming to this branch for 15 years, ever since he'd moved to Springfield to be closer to his daughter. The tellers knew him by sight, always polite, never complained about wait times, and always thanked them by name. Behind Frank, a younger man in an expensive suit checked his watch repeatedly. Derek Hoffman, 32, was a real estate developer who prided himself on efficiency. He had a closing at 10:30 and 3 meetings before lunch. Every minute counted. As the line moved forward, Derek noticed Frank's wheelchair taking up more space than usual. When Frank reached the teller window, Derek watched him slowly retrieve his checkbook, fumble with his reading glasses, and carefully fill out a deposit slip. The elderly man's hands shook slightly as he wrote, and he had to ask the teller to repeat the account balance. "Come on," Derek muttered under his breath. Two people ahead of him glanced back. Frank continued his transaction at his own pace, discussing something quietly with the teller about his monthly Social Security deposit. Derek shifted his weight, tapped his foot, and checked his phone again. "Sir, could you please hurry up?" Derek called out, loud enough for half the bank to hear. "Some of us have actual business to conduct." Frank turned his wheelchair slightly, meeting Derek's eyes with a calm, steady gaze. He didn't respond, just nodded politely and turned back to the teller. "This is ridiculous," Derek continued, his voice rising. "I've been waiting here for 20 minutes behind someone who should probably be doing his banking online or having someone else handle it for him." The bank grew uncomfortably quiet. Other customers looked down at their phones or studied the floor. The teller, a young woman named Sarah, shifted nervously. "Sir, I'm almost finished," Frank said softly, his voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested years of wear. "Almost finished?" Derek stepped closer. "You've been up there forever. Some of us have jobs, responsibilities. We can't spend all day on simple banking because we're too old or too slow to figure out modern life." Frank's shoulders remained straight, his expression unchanged. He'd weathered worse storms than an impatient stranger in a bank line. As Derek's complaints grew louder, drawing the attention of everyone in the lobby, Frank simply continued his business. He signed his deposit slip with steady precision, the way he'd once signed mission reports under enemy fire. His movements were deliberate, economical, traits burned into him by decades of military discipline. Sarah, the teller, noticed something the others had missed. As Frank leaned forward to slide his deposit across the counter, a small pin on his shirt pocket caught the light. It was about the size of a quarter, silver and blue with a distinctive rifle surrounded by a wreath. She'd seen similar pins before. Her grandfather had worn one, but she couldn't quite remember what it meant. Derek, meanwhile, had moved to the next teller window, still muttering about inconsiderate seniors and wasted time. Other customers began to take sides, some nodding in agreement with Derek's frustration, others shooting disapproving glances at his rudeness. Frank completed his transaction, thanked Sarah by name, and began turning his wheelchair toward the exit. As he moved, the pin on his shirt pocket became visible to more people in the lobby. Most didn't recognize it, but there was something about the way Frank carried himself, even in his wheelchair, that suggested depths they couldn't see. Tom Bradley, the bank manager, had been watching the scene unfold from his office doorway. A 55-year-old former Army sergeant, Tom had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before transitioning to civilian life. He'd built a successful banking career, but the military had never really left him. Tom was about to step in and calm the situation when Frank's wheelchair turned, and the morning light streaming through the bank's windows illuminated the pin on his shirt pocket. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The Combat Infantry Badge, the CIB. Tom knew that pin like he knew his own name. He'd earned one himself, but what he was seeing on Frank's shirt pocket was different, older, more weathered. The silver had a patina that only came from decades of wear, and the blue enamel showed the kind of fading that happened when a badge had been through more than just ceremony. Tom's military training kicked in. He read the signs instantly. Frank's posture, the way he moved his wheelchair with precise, economical motions, the calm with which he'd handled Derek's abuse. This wasn't just any elderly man. This was a combat veteran, and from the look of that badge, one who'd seen serious action. Tom stepped forward, his banker's demeanor giving way to something deeper. He'd been taught to recognize and respect that badge, and everything it represented. "Excuse me," Tom said, his voice carrying across the lobby with quiet authority. The room fell silent as he approached Frank's wheelchair. Derek, still complaining to his teller, looked up annoyed. "Finally, someone's going to do something about—" "Mr. Morrison," Tom interrupted, his eyes fixed on Frank. He came to a stop directly in front of the wheelchair, and for a moment, something passed between the two men, a recognition that transcended the civilian world around them. Tom's gaze dropped to the Combat Infantry Badge, and his posture straightened almost imperceptibly. When he looked back up, his expression had changed completely. "Thank you for your service," Tom said quietly, but his words carried clearly through the silent lobby. Frank's eyes met Tom's, and in that moment, both men understood. Tom wasn't just a bank manager making polite conversation. He was a fellow soldier, acknowledging a brother. "3rd Infantry Division," Frank said simply. "Korea, 1952 to 53. Tom nodded slowly. 101st Airborne. Afghanistan, 2008 to 2012. The lobby remained frozen. Derek's complaint died in his throat. Sarah, the teller, felt goosebumps rise on her arms without fully understanding why. In the space of those few exchanged words, the entire atmosphere of the bank lobby transformed. Frank wasn't just an old man in a wheelchair anymore. He was a combat veteran of the Korean War, a soldier who'd faced Chinese forces across frozen hills when most of the people in this room hadn't been born yet. Tom remained standing at attention-like posture, his respect evident to everyone watching. Other customers began to understand, even if they didn't know the specific details. The pin on Frank's shirt pocket wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of service, sacrifice, and survival. Derek, suddenly aware that his complaints had been directed at a war veteran, felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The expensive suit, the important meetings, the real estate deals, all of it seemed suddenly trivial. "Sir," Derek said, stepping forward hesitantly, I didn't realize. I'm sorry." Frank turned his wheelchair toward Derek, studying the younger man with the same calm assessment he'd used on enemy positions 70 years earlier. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "No harm done, son," Frank said simply. "We all have places to be." But Derek wasn't finished. "No, sir, it's not okay. I was completely out of line. Please go ahead of me next time. I insist." Frank's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate that, but I don't need special treatment. I just need the same respect you give anyone else." The lesson hit home. Derek nodded, genuinely chastened. Tom accompanied Frank to the exit, walking beside the wheelchair with the measured pace of someone who understood that some things shouldn't be rushed. As they reached the door, Frank paused. "You know," he said, looking back at the lobby, "most people see the wheelchair first. They forget that we all have stories." Tom nodded. "Yes, sir, but some stories are worth remembering." Frank smiled, the first real smile he'd shown all morning. "Take care of yourself, Sergeant." "You too, sir." Frank rolled through the automatic doors and into the morning sunshine. Tom watched him navigate the sidewalk with the same precise movements he'd used inside the bank, then disappear around the corner toward the parking garage. When Tom returned to the lobby, the atmosphere had permanently changed. Derek was still at his teller window, but his aggressive impatience had been replaced by something more thoughtful. Sarah, the teller, was looking up information about the combat infantry badge on her computer. Other customers were having quiet conversations about respect and service. For the rest of the day, the bank felt different. Staff members found themselves being more patient with elderly customers, more attentive to the details of individual stories. Derek canceled his 10:30 meeting and spent the time researching the Korean War, trying to understand what Frank Morrison had experienced as a young soldier. Tom returned to his office, but his mind kept drifting to the encounter. He'd met other Korean War veterans before, but there was something about Frank's quiet dignity that stayed with him. The way he'd handled Derek's rudeness without anger or complaint spoke to a depth of character that came from facing real adversity. That evening, Tom called his own father, a Vietnam veteran who rarely talked about his service. For the first time in years, they had a real conversation about what military service meant, about the invisible bonds that connected veterans across generations. Sarah went home and called her grandfather, the one who'd worn a similar pin. She'd never asked him about it before, but now she wanted to understand. Her grandfather, surprised by the call, began sharing stories he'd kept buried for decades. Frank Morrison returned to the bank the following Tuesday, same as always. He moved at his own pace, filled out his deposit slip carefully, and thanked Sarah by name. But now when other customers saw him, they saw something different. They saw a man who'd served his country in wartime, who'd faced dangers most of them couldn't imagine, and who'd earned the right to take all the time he needed. Derek, who happened to be in line again, nodded respectfully when Frank entered. There was no impatience, no complaint about wait times. Instead, Derek found himself wondering what other quiet heroes might be standing in line at coffee shops, sitting in waiting rooms, or walking through grocery stores without anyone recognizing the depth of their service. The combat infantry badge on Frank's shirt pocket remained the same, a simple pin that most people wouldn't recognize. But for those who knew what it meant, it told a story of courage, sacrifice, and survival that no bank transaction could diminish. Tom Bradley kept that morning in his memory, a reminder that respect isn't just about politeness, it's about recognizing the unseen depths in every person we encounter. Frank Morrison had taught him that lesson without saying a word, simply by carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned it through fire. Weeks later, Frank still came to the bank every Tuesday. He'd become something of a local legend, the quiet veteran who'd changed the way people thought about patience and respect. Tom had framed a photo of the 3rd Infantry Division and hung it in his office, a reminder of the lesson he'd learned. The bank lobby had become a more courteous place. Customers held doors for each other, offered seats to those who needed them, and generally treated each other with the kind of respect that Frank had demonstrated even under provocation. Derek had become an unexpected advocate for veterans' affairs, using his real estate connections to help with housing for homeless vets. The encounter with Frank had opened his eyes to a world of service and sacrifice he'd never considered. Sarah had started volunteering at the VA hospital, reading to patients and helping with administrative tasks. Her grandfather's stories had inspired her to give back to the community that had given so much. But Frank himself remained unchanged, quiet, dignified, and unassuming. He'd simply continued being who he'd always been, a man who'd served his country with honor and carried that honor with him every day, whether anyone recognized it or not. The combat infantry badge on his shirt pocket continued to catch the light each Tuesday morning, a small silver and blue reminder that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just roll through automatic doors, wait patiently in line, and teach us about respect without saying a word. Every day, retired veterans like Frank Morrison walk among us in banks, grocery stores, coffee shops, and community centers. They carry decades of experience, stories of service and sacrifice, yet their contributions often go unrecognized. Their quiet dignity, earned through years of defending our freedoms, deserves our respect and acknowledgement. If you found Frank's story compelling and want to hear more about the unsung heroes who've served our country, hit that like button and subscribe to Echo Bravo. These veterans have incredible stories to share, and every subscription helps us continue bringing their experiences to light. What other quiet heroes might be waiting in line beside you? Let us know in the comments below.